Okay, welcome everybody. This is Recovery Cafe's monthly volunteer training. The topic for this month is recovery capital and recovery maintenance. I've asked a person in recovery, and full disclosure, my father-in-law, Bruce Hanson, to come facilitate our training today. So I thought we could start with Bruce, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, and then we'll do very brief introductions of everyone else.
Okay, well, thanks, Brian. Yeah, well, I'm Bruce, and like Brian said, I am a person in recovery. Just to maybe very quickly qualify on that, my I my issues are addiction to alcohol and other drugs. Uh, I was active as an addict between the ages of 12 and 20. Uh, I knew when I was 16 that I was in trouble, and that there was, especially if I drank, there was no telling how much I would drink or what would happen to me. And I landed in a treatment center. I grew up in Minneapolis, so it was in Minneapolis, and I will probably talk a little more about that. But well, for a variety of reasons, it stuck, and I've been clean and sober ever since, 44 years now. And so that's part of it. I have also, for the past number of years, maybe 3 years now, I have been a volunteer at the Recovery Cafe in Seattle. I live in downtown Seattle right now. And through that, I have been through the recovery coach training that CCAR puts out. There may be some of you that have experienced that as well. I've been what they have called a minister of presence at the cafe, where mostly what I've done is gone there and, been with people, just sit and listen and talk and discuss. And I guess one of the things I love about the Recovery Cafe and the model is I sort of sum it up as we meet people where they're at and we love them. And the power of that, I find, is really amazing. So I will, as we get into the topic, I will talk more about my experience, but I think that's enough for now. I look forward to spending this next time with you folks.
Thank you, Bruce. So I want to say welcome, Shirley. Hello, good to see you.
Thank you, Brian.
And so I wanted to ground us too in a little bit about Recovery Cafe and why we're doing these monthly trainings. So the purpose of our time here together is twofold. One is this is a time for us to spend time together, and hopefully we'll get to know each other a little bit better by sharing some of our perspectives and experiences. And as we learn, we'll kind of, like I said, get to know each other. So that's one purpose, is community building. And then the second purpose of our monthly trainings is to develop skills that might help not only our own recovery, but it might help us to support the recovery of other people. And it might be people at Recovery Cafe, or it might be people in your own personal or professional lives. So with that, I would love to do a brief introduction for everyone who's here today. And I've noticed that it seems to work best if I kind of give some direction on who should speak when, so we don't talk over each other. Zoom can be tough for that. So I'll go first, and then I'll have Carol and Rhea go, and I'll give the next three as we keep going. So I'm Brian, as you guys know. I work for Recovery Cafe Jefferson County, which is a program of Dove House. I've lived here in this community for about 4 years now. I would identify as an adult child of an alcoholic. My family has a lot of recovery from both substance use disorder as well as mental health issues. And what brings me to the work, I guess, is partially that, and also this idea that stems from the Recovery Cafe that everybody's in recovery from something, which to me is a helpful way of thinking about, well, issues of social justice, but also our own stuff, where I start to see myself as no different from anybody else. So I've got stuff to work on just as much as anybody else does. And the Recovery Cafe is a great place for me because I get to bring more of my full self to the work that I enjoy doing. So glad to be here. And so if we could just do name and what brings you here today, that will do our introduction. Try to keep it to 1 or 2 minutes each. So Carol and then Rhea.
My name is Carol McCreary, and I work for an organization called Flush, which means Public Hygiene Lets Us Stay Human. And our first order of business is trying to find available restrooms, because the stress, in addition to everything we're going through, of not finding a restroom is humiliating and awful. And it's especially disturbing now during COVID because so many are closed. Brian gave me permission to just mention that we're working on we have a Jefferson County restroom finder, and we have tracked about 60, 65, 70 restrooms in the county that people can use as they're transiting. But we'd love to have somebody review it and tell us if we have mistakes. And we've verified the parks restrooms. There are many of those, but they will close. So I'm just going to put that in the chat, and please don't open that link now because we're doing something else. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. And Rhea?
Wow, thank you, Carol. I didn't know about that. I appreciate what you're doing. So I am adult child of an alcoholic, and I had 2 partners that were alcoholic. And this is my first time stepping in to being a part of assisting in this area because of my own issues through that journey, that experience. And so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhea. Good to see you. So for our next 3, could we have John, Janice, then Mark?
Hi, I'm John Hamilton. I am also an adult child of an alcoholic, and I did have 1 partner who was an alcoholic. But my main focus being part of the Dove House is I'm also a Vietnam combat vet with post-traumatic stress, and I am here to help other veterans with Brian, if there's anything we can develop along that line. So that's why I'm here, and thanks.
Hi, I'm Janice Lehman. I'm a volunteer guy. I trained as a recovery coach, and doing these trainings to learn more to be a recovery coach, to understand it for myself first. This whole recovery is so different than I've been a practicing addict I started at 21, not as young as Bruce, but I've always had different addictions in and out of recoveries, but never quite got it correctly, and neither did my family. Had a lot of tragedies in my family. So I'm here to be to learn, and that's what I just want to learn all this so that I can be a recovery coach here. Thanks.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Janice. And Mark?
I'm Mark Cooper. As you saw before, I'm with Local 2020. I'm here because there's a group of people that are looking at the homeless situation. One of the things that constantly comes up, and you saw it on the first page of the leader this week, is the NIMBY regarding, addiction issues. And so I'm looking to see what types of partnerships might be able to do that, because that comes up every time you talk about creating affordable housing. So.
Welcome, Mark. I'd love to talk with you about that offline sometime. All right, and our next three will have Donna, Denise, and then Caitlin.
All right. Hi, my name is Donna Markland Tarleton, and who am I? I'm also an adult child of an alcoholic, and I did do the recovery training with Brian a while back. That was really cool, and different from, a little bit different from what I'd learned from AA after working at Grey Wolf Ranch for like a decade or so. And why? Oh, and also I'm going to school right now, so I'm actually a full-time student. My grant ended at the Port Townsend High School, and not so long ago. And yeah, I'm just here too because I believe we're all in recovery of something, and I just love supporting others and learning myself. So that's pretty much why I'm here. I think I got everything. Yeah, nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Donna.
Thanks, Brian. My name's Denise Banker, and I am here because I too was a volunteer at Recovery Cafe in Seattle. I was a minister of presence, and I was also a writing teacher. So I offered writing classes, creative writing, poetry, and nonfiction. And it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. I am an alcoholic in recovery, and I knew by the time I was 18 that I was an alcoholic, and then it took me until I was 26 to quit. So I've been off the booze for quite a number of years, and I'm here to say that, right? Thank goodness.
Hi, Denise. It's nice to see you.
Thanks, Denise. And you, Caitlin?
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I have only lived on the peninsula for a couple of years. I'm actually in Salt Lake City, Utah right now. I'm going to school for a body work program, and I'm really just here to listen and learn and grow and hopefully hold space for those and support those as much as I can in doing the same.
Welcome. Good to see you.
Thanks.
And then we'll have Shirley go, and we have one person who's not on video, and I'll let you decide if you'd like to share after Shirley. You're on mute, Shirley. I'll do my best, try to unmute you.
Oh, here we go. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. I fiddled around with recovery years and years and years ago, but nothing really stuck. And thank goodness I did, because it helped me recognize why I wanted to commit suicide. I had, I grew up in a dysfunctional family, and my sister never went through any kind of recovery, and she died very, very, very hard. And that was another clue for me. And so I just kept poking around, and then actually tried the suicide and got a vision that said, no, this is not what you want to do. And so that's what really started me on a serious road. And it's been hell, and it's been wonderful. And I've just kept poking around, and I've just done a lot of recovery myself. I ran a ACA meeting for 4 years, twice a week, and that was a lot of my recovery, is listening to other people and recognizing how much we're all the same. And so I just want to help people as long as I can, and learn as much as I can. I am moving to Paulsbo, so that'll cut it a little bit short, but that's all right. There's recovery people over in Paulsbo too. So I just want to learn as much as I can. And I am just so, so grateful for Brian, and I'm so glad that the Recovery Cafe came to Port Townsend. So thanks so much for being here, everybody.
Thank you, Shirley. And I'll give our last attendee a chance to introduce yourself if you'd like. Otherwise, we'll move on. I'll just give you a moment here. Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for doing that. I appreciate it. I think it's important, even though it's challenging in this Zoom setting, for us to try to get to know each other a little bit. What I'll say is that my expectations, at least, of what can be accomplished in Zoom as far as like our recovery circles go and that kind of thing has been greatly surpassed. What I've seen, I guess, is some genuine connections form, authentic relationships between people. And that's really, for me at least, what's at the heart of the Recovery Cafe program, is people being able to truly connect with one another. And through those relationships, then we have the support, hopefully, that we will need to recover from whatever it is that we're recovering from. So thank you for that. So I guess I want to pass it back to Bruce to introduce our topic and get us started on Recovery Capital.
Recovery Capital.
Thanks, Brian. Well, what I hope to do is spend. We've got two main areas of material we're going to cover. The first being talking about this idea of recovery capital, and then the second one, the idea of recovery maintenance. And before we jump into that, I do want to say that from my introduction, all that, my focus is going to be probably more on addiction, on substance use disorders. But I hear that many of you have, family issues and other things. I also am an adult child of an alcoholic. I come from a very alcoholic family. Though when I first got to rehab, I thought I was the anomaly and the strange one, and didn't understand why any of this happened. But over time, I did come to learn, and like 4 out of 5 of my family of origin were people who had addiction problems, and both of my brothers today are sober. They found their way, but probably in spite of me than because of me. So I guess to say that my recovery has been focused over the years mostly around 12-step programs, AA and Al-Anon in particular, ACA, NA, a couple others. But some of the things, as we get into talking about recovery capital, it's an idea that I really got exposed to deeply maybe 4 or 5 years ago. When I hit 40 years of sobriety, I sort of had this time where I was thinking, what am I doing and why am I doing this? I would probably go to maybe one AA meeting a week, maybe every other week. And I wondered, like, what is it that works for me? And also what's going on in research, and what's the current knowledge that we have about working with substance use disorders? And one of the first concepts, as I started exploring the first concept I ran into was about recovery capital. And we'll get into this more deeply, but I do want to say is that I found it to be a very, very helpful framework in understanding that probably when I got here, there were areas where I had, like zero capital, especially in my own personal in my own personal life, I had few resources to tap into, though some things like, Carol, you talked about restrooms. Well, I mean, if you don't have access to a restroom, that could be that's very serious. And I did have access to things like that, but I was fortunate to have been in a community where at the time there were uh, both uh, good rehabs based on, well, the work that Hazelden and other places did and what they call the Minnesota model of treatment. Along with, when I got out of there or even in treatment, started going to 12-step meetings, I found that there were a lot of young people who were staying clean and sober. And that was also just a tremendous gift, because I guess sometimes in the 12-step things we talk about, well, program versus fellowship or whatever. I think over the years, as I look at, it's been fellowship and being in rooms and in spaces like these now where we are telling our stories to each other has been and remains a continual source of hope and inspiration and help for me. And as I think about recovery capital, a way of building and maintaining the recovery capital that I have. I have seen over the years, I have seen some people with long-term sobriety go back out and die. I've seen others. There's a meeting that I've been attending through Zoom. There's a woman there who had 33 years or 35 years sober, and she relapsed for about 7 years and is just coming back. And it can happen to any of us. And so anyway, what I want to do, I've got a few slides I want to show. I'm going to talk very briefly about a few concepts of recovery capital. And then Brian and I are going to lead you through a little evaluation exercise where we can each get a look at our own recovery capital assets. And then I want to make sure we have plenty of time to discuss this, because I think really where the good stuff is going to happen is when we talk and share our own experiences and our own aha moments and things that are happening. So let me share my screen. And I have to say, I'm not a great fan of presentations like this, but I wanted to have a map. I thought this morning, if I had had a little more time, I'd actually draw a map or use a map as a way of showing how these concepts relate. So that may be something for a future. Let's see. There we go. This is Zoom with. All right. So in a nutshell, what is recovery capital? I've got it up there. It's these things we have that we can use both to initiate recovery and to support our ongoing recovery. And this concept has been around now, I don't know, maybe 20 years even, where people, especially professionals in substance use disorder field, have been talking about it. I also think that these are things that can help people who have other mental or emotional health issues beyond substance use disorder. And but basically, these three areas: our own assets, the things we ourselves bring, and some things in a personal list of personal assets maybe, include things. Do we do we, have a safe, stable place to live? Do we, have our basic needs met, food and things like that. Uh, uh, Other internal assets can be things like education, uh, uh, you know, interpersonal relationship abilities, all kinds of things like that. And you'll see as we go through the exercise, you'll see some things in there that will highlight that. Uh, Second category is our close circle of people around us. Uh, uh, there are assets there. And finally, in the bigger picture, there are community assets. And obviously, our gathering here today under the umbrella of the Recovery Cafe indicates that there is a community asset. This is the Recovery Cafe is one of those. Interesting also, for all of these assets, there are flip sides. There are things that we may have, or we may be carrying, or we may be involved with that are, not assets. They're more, liabilities, issues, things. One that comes to mind for me quickly is the assets I had due to my family in particular, or lack thereof, because of being in an alcoholic family. And I've also learned from my Al-Anon experience that often the things I think of doing to help a family member who is having issues, the things I instinctually want to do are probably the wrong things. And when I started recognizing that and attending Al-Anon and working on those things, that was very much a turning point for me. And community assets could be, I mentioned that when I came out of rehab, I found AA meetings with lots of young people. I mean, that was an asset that I just unknowingly walked into. And it's interesting, Caitlin and I were just chatting briefly before about Salt Lake City. I lived in Salt Lake City for 5 years, moving there when I was about 5 years sober. And I found that it was a very, at the time, there were very few young people who were sober. And it was a challenge. And I was glad to have had what I had, though when I've been there now, I've been to meetings, that, at least around young people, that's pretty different. Anyway, that is the quick introduction I want to do with this. And I guess, Brian, I'll stop sharing. And
Thank you. Yeah, for that introduction to the topic, Bruce. So I had sent out beforehand in an email it was a primer on Recovery Capital, like an introduction on Recovery Capital by a researcher named William White. And I'm wondering if anyone had a chance to take a look at that. Okay. And so based on either that or just the idea that Bruce has presented about Recovery Capital, I'm wondering what comes up for people with that. If you're connecting it to your own story, great. Or even you have questions about, okay, I still don't get what we're talking about here. And we'll do popcorn style, so whoever wants to chime in, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I would say that I stayed away from being a part of any group because growing up, it was a secret in our home. It was not talked about by to anyone. It didn't go beyond our doors. And so even when I became an adult and I married into it, I wouldn't go to a group because I was still kind of like programmed for it to be a secret. And it was just about the family in that home, not anything else. So I missed out. I feel like I missed out of having some healing for myself until I got older.
Thank you for that, Rhea. Yeah, I'm hearing some things about stigma and shame, which are things that prevent us from seeking the help that we need. And that's an aspect of culture, whether that's like within your own family culture. I've heard it called the conspiracy of silence that we engage in an effort to kind of protect ourselves from this thing that's really difficult and hard to engage in. Or if we give voice to it, if we name it, that makes it real, or worse, than if we try to ignore it, sweep it under the rug. So how I might relate that to this concept of recovery capital, if we had an environment, either community or culture, in which we have a shared language and understanding of recovery issues, that would be an asset to us to initiate or sustain recovery.
I suppose, one could say something about how important the fact of recovery capital is in maintaining recovery, just how you said, Brian, just now. Because so often what happens is your whole community, that you hang with, like your group of friends or your group of colleagues that you kind of associate with at work or whatever it is, or if you're a child, you don't recognize what it is that's causing the issue in your family. What is my discomfort? You don't recognize that because you think that this is just normal behavior, because it's the only behavior you know when you're a child. And so you don't even know how to recognize and reach out. But part of having recovery capital is having a group of people who aren't imbibing, right? Who aren't partaking in the activity, and who are there to say and model and also illustrate, just by watching, the benefits to being in recovery. And then you can slowly or quickly glom onto those people, and so and keep coming back and say, hey, this makes me feel good. And every time it makes you feel good, then you come back again, and then you create different dopamines, right? So you're not getting your dopamine high from whatever substance you're taking. You're getting it from interaction with people who are sober, and that builds your recovery capital, and you keep coming back to it in that way, because it makes you feel good to be in that community. And I think that's kind of how Recovery Cafe works, is that, as a minister of presence, if you're sitting in that lounge and you're just hanging out and you're just being who you are, people recognize that, and they and they feel good about it. They feel accepted, and you feel accepted. So I'm going to stop now.
Well said, Denise. No, that was beautiful. I mean, there's lots of things that I could pull out of that, and a couple that stood out to me was this idea that having a community in which we feel like we belong, we feel accepted, we feel a part of, is the opposite of what Rhea was talking about with the shame and stigma, right? It's this attraction that we feel, and this comfort in our own skin, that we feel like, okay, I can be okay here. I'm not going to be judged or castigated or whatever. And the other thing that I'm hearing you say too is having these models of different ways of being in recovery, and the opportunity to develop the skills that we might need to cope with life challenges so that we don't have to rely on other ways of coping, which it may be, you know, patterns of behavior that we no longer wish to engage in, or substance use, which causes other kinds of consequences in our life, whether that's our relationships, physical health, or whatever. Having those opportunities to practice those skills because we're in a community where we feel safe to do that. Any other reactions from people on either Bruce's introduction or the things that have been shared so far on Recovery Capital?
For me, I think it's one more area where in the past 2 months, 3 months, I've really understand how privileged I've been.
Thank you for that, Carol. Yeah, I appreciate your vulnerability in stating that, because I think a lot of times, at least for me, how I was coming to understand my own power and privilege, you know, within my community, it can lead to this feeling of guilt or whatever, right? You know, guilt can be a helpful emotion for motivating us to make a change, you know, or our response could be to kind of like shrivel up and hide away, you know. But yes, I would say Recovery Capital is power, right? There's power in some of these things that we're talking about, you know, and the correlation that we see is that those who have more recovery capital have a higher correlation with positive long-term recovery outcomes, right? And some of this I feel like we know, it's like kind of obvious. It's like, well, yeah, of course, you know, if you have housing, if you have access to your basic needs, right? It's like kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, that's the basic stuff. And I don't want to like give away one of the learning points that I'm hoping that we'll get out of this, but we will touch on it at some point. But what I was saying is that these aspects of recovery capital are the things that give us power to maintain and sustain recovery over time. So Bruce, maybe I'll bounce it back to you unless there's someone else who'd like to share more on this subject. Shirley, you're on mute.
I'd like to say that the most difficult, and but it led me to a great deal of capital because I grew up in a very irresponsive family, and so I didn't know what I needed or how to get what I needed or even that I needed anything except to do what people told me to as a child. And so after a lot of therapy, my therapist said, well, how about we work on your mom? Uh-oh. Well, she took me to the point of, I don't know, my desire to change and her ability allowed me to take that step to forgive my mom. And that helped me to understand that I was really no different from my mom. I did not drink. I don't have any substance abuses, but what I do have is a abuse of relationships. I'm always trying to fix mom and dad. And when I realized that my mom and I were just the same. She was an alcoholic, but at the same time, she grew up without love, without direction, without affection, and married men that acted accordingly. But she didn't have a Brian. She didn't have a recovery cafe. And so she drank herself to death. And I realized that I was just the same. I wasn't drinking, but I was doing something equally as damaging. And so that was my biggest step, I think, that I was able to identify with my mom, love her again, and proceed to get rid of all the guilt. And so that was a huge, huge step for me. And to recognize that she and I were just the same. So thanks.
Thank you, Shirley. What a powerful realization.
Yeah,
And,
it was.
and I'm hearing that you were able to come to that realization because you had professional support in that instance. You had somebody who was helping you explore those issues in your life and in your family dynamic. And to relate this to the topic, which is just that for those of us who have access to professional supports, therapists, treatment, whatever, that is a form of recovery capital, which is exactly what Carol was just talking about. It's it's an issue of equity, frankly. Who has power and who doesn't, and who has access to the resources and services that they need to either initiate or sustain recovery. That's all one and the same. Thank you for bringing that example, Shirley.
You're welcome.
Well, Bruce, do you think it's a good time to do our activity?
Yeah, I think just really quickly, I really appreciated the things that you folks have shared so far. Just really not only appreciated, but identified myself with things like uh, uh, I grew up in a Minnesota Norwegian family, and I do joke about it, but we were kind of the stereotypical and didn't talk about anything. And all of that was just kind of like the air that we'd breathe, and not didn't know any different. Um, and the history in my family is over time in recovery, I have kind of like mapped out that. And Shirley, I really appreciate what you shared about your relationship and your understanding of your mother, because I've had a similar experience with both of my parents. But my mother died of cancer about a year before I got sober. So, that relationship was cut off. My father lived, he passed away a couple years ago. And so he and I were able to have relationships as adults. And I did get to a place where I could actually see him as just another guy trying to get along. We used to be so angry at each other years ago and didn't like each other. And um, that did change. But having the capital to do that is, I mean, some of it still is, you just think, well, I sometimes say there's a reading that's often read at the beginning of a meeting that, in my view, sort of starts out blaming the victim. If this doesn't work for you, then there's something wrong with you. And I think through Recovery Capital, I mean, and that has always struck me. I mean, always. Though interestingly, the meetings I went to in Minneapolis, people generally did not read that. But anyway, understanding a little better my own recovery capital, and especially like people I sponsor or other things, understanding what some of their strengths and weaknesses are really does help us understand what kinds of things we can do to navigate this terrain that is not at all easy to navigate. So we're going to move into doing a little exercise of evaluating our recovery capital. And Brian is going to read some statements. There's about a page and a half of the paper he sent out by William White that is a little evaluation of the various parts or components of recovery capital. It's not, I think, meant to be exhaustive, but it still gives at least a picture. And Brian's going to read each one and give us, you know, just a brief period to give each one a score in our lives, from one being, this is some piece of recovery capital that I am missing or lacking or very low in, to 5 being one that I'm doing good here. And I'd also suggest you might want to think, I mean, I'll leave this up to you. You might want to think, do I want to do this in the present? Or maybe I'd want to think about it as where was I at when I was initiating recovery? Or maybe some other time period in your life. So this is really, for you to think about and look at. We're not going to share our scores or anything like that, but you can, jot down for each statement, jot down a number, and either follow up with it with the paper, or total it up yourself and get a sense of things. Or you may just find, this thing, didn't even think about it, but I'm kind of low there. Or this thing, wow, I'm doing, I'm doing good. So anyway, we're going to spend a few minutes doing that. So
Great. Thank you for that, Bruce. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see, if you're able to on your own screen, you can take a look at this recovery capital scale from William White here. For those of you who received the email ahead of time, of course, you could pull it up on your own computer as well. What I'm going to do is, if you'd like to just go ahead and do it yourself, great. For those who maybe have trouble reading this on your screen, I'm going to go ahead and read each statement. So the directions are: place a number by each statement that best summarizes your situation. 1, like Bruce said, is strongly disagree with the statement. 2 is disagree. 3 is sometimes. 4 is agree. And 5 is strongly agree. So the first statement: I have the financial resources to provide for myself and my family. 1, strongly disagree. 5, strongly agree. The next one: I have personal transportation or access to public transportation. I live in a home and neighborhood that is safe and secure. I live in an environment free from alcohol and other drugs. I have an intimate partner supportive of my recovery process. I have family members who are supportive of my recovery process. I have friends who are supportive of my recovery process. I have people close to me, like intimate partner, family members, or friends, who are also in recovery. I have a stable job that I enjoy that provides for my basic necessities. I have an education or work environment that is conducive to my long-term recovery. I participate in a continuing care program of an addiction treatment program that may include groups, alumni association meetings, etc. I have a professional assistance program that is monitoring and supporting my recovery process. I have a primary care physician who attends to my health problems. I am now in reasonably good health. I have an active plan to manage any lingering or potential health problems. I'm on prescribed medication that minimizes my cravings for alcohol and other drugs. I have insurance that will allow me to receive help for major health problems. I have access to regular, nutritious meals. I have clothing that is comfortable, clean, and conducive to my recovery activities. I have access to recovery support groups in my local community. I have established close affiliation with a local recovery support group. I have a sponsor or equivalent mentor who serves as a special mentor related to my recovery. I have access to online recovery support groups. I have completed or am complying with all legal requirements related to my past. There are other people who rely on me to support their own recoveries. My immediate physical environment contains literature, tokens, posters, or other symbols of my commitment to recovery. I have recovery rituals that are now part of my daily life. I had a profound experience that marked the beginning or deepening of my commitment to recovery. There are 7 left of these. I'll finish them now. I now have goals and great hopes for my recovery, or excuse me, for my future. I have problem-solving skills and resources that I lacked during my years of active addiction. I feel like I have meaningful, positive participation in my family and community. Today, I have a clear sense of who I am. I know that my life has a purpose. Service to others is an important part of my life. And this is the last one. My personal values and sense of right and wrong have become clearer and stronger in recent years. So if you were to answer 5 on every single one of those, the total possible score would be 175. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do that, to add yours up right now. You can later, of course, if you like. But I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share and bring us back. I hope I didn't go too fast on those. So I know, Bruce, you had a couple questions you wanted to ask after doing that.
Yeah, well, I think, I guess the gist of the questions I'd like to ask is what kinds of thoughts, feelings, experiences, questions, issues came up for you as we went through the list?
You know, thanks for that, Brian and Bruce. What I'd like to say is that recovery sometimes in families is complicated by family members drinking or, you know, partaking in whatever whatever substance it is, and or whatever mental health issue that's at hand. Also, in my particular family, you know, I was the alcoholic, and everybody was like on me. Stop drinking. You are a drunk. You know, you are reckless and wild and etc. You know, and I was going to college and getting A's and B's and you know, working a job and etc. and so on, and you know, getting advanced degrees, and I thought, wow, so you know, there was a moment where I realized that there was something bigger than me, and I stopped drinking. And then I became the real pariah of the family because I went to the family gatherings and didn't drink. And, you know, so now I'm like the outsider because I don't drink. And, you know, so it's like that weird, you gain this recovery capital, and at the same time, you have to release some other things, right? So it got to the point where, you know, me and my children and spouse, we didn't really go to the family gatherings. The family gatherings were wild parties, and that just wasn't our cup of tea any longer. And so then we also had to learn how to negotiate that we weren't being rejected by the family, and we weren't rejecting the family, and we weren't supporting this continuation of discomfort in our own lives. So, you know, you build up capital, and you recognize that there's complications in the capital you're holding.
Well said. Thank you for sharing that, Denise. One thing that came up for me when I was reading these was just the reflection on who's in this space right now, even, you know, who had access to, who has time to do it, you know, who has access to the internet and has the skills to navigate how to get here, you know, who had a safe, quiet home or place to be to do this. And so I would, you know, make the argument that all of us have those pieces, at least, of recovery capital. Any other thoughts and reflections from people as they did that?
I'm sorry, go ahead, please, Dan.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
So I was just gonna say, well, first of all, I just think it's good. I like these kind of exercises because sometimes we just go along with life and we don't stop enough to like look and check where we're at. So I just liked that part of it. And also I haven't gone to Al-Anon in forever. And I felt like it was a little invitation to do that again, just to just for my own personal growth and so forth, and another piece of my recovery capital. So it was good that came up.
That's lovely. Thank you, Donna. And Rhea, you were going to say something?
I think what I've been realizing in the last couple of years only is that I put all my energies since I was a little girl on taking care of others. And that was my focus always. And it has been up until just recently that I need to be taking a look at how this has affected me in my life. And I haven't done that. So just more of that.
Thank you, Rhea. I want to make space for those who haven't had the opportunity to share yet. If there's anything that you might like to contribute, either based on this activity or the topic as it relates to your own personal experiences.
After doing this exercise, it's like, so as I said in the beginning, I've been in and out of recoveries, but it never quite took. So I went from one addiction, recovered for a while, lived, maintained, and then another addiction came up, fell apart again. But what I was missing, I've always had the personal things. I have the space, I have money, I have finances, I've had abilities, those kind of things. But family, friends, community, and I refuse to allow that in my life until now. This is Recovery Cafe, and meeting Brian is the first time I've really been doing this in a recovery circle. It's like, no, there was something internally that if I allowed myself to let people touch me, I actually felt I would just explode. I would just disappear. I don't know what I was running from, but I always never allowed that piece. And I'm realizing now that's what's kept me running all my life. That's why I've never really recovered. I recovered to a point. I understand the education. I understand how to do things, but to apply it, people and community, I did not trust anybody. And I had too many things happen to me that I just refused to be hurt again, to be just assumed that would happen. So now I'm seeing, and this is current, this is very current for me. I always knew that. I told my sons, you have to have a connection, you have to have friends, but I didn't know how to do it. I lived a life of secrets also, that kind of family. So, but now I'm seeing the impact of this, how unbalanced. It doesn't matter. The personal is there. That's the foundational parts. And I'm very grateful that I had that and didn't have to go through life without those. But I would not allow that connection. And because of my fears and who I thought I was, I didn't like myself at all. So now I'm seeing the importance of this, and that's all this rambling is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Beautifully said, Janice. Thank you for that. Yes, Carol, go ahead.
Well, like so many other things, the really low numbers are the important and interesting ones. But in terms of my personal, first thing that hit me is that a year ago this time, I was waiting for the dark days to come back because I had so many projects and it was very, very happy. And since COVID hit, it has changed so much. And I saw that in working on that human services group with looking at the needs of the community. So, I mean, if I feel it, it's 20 times more for people that don't have the recovery capital. So it's just the difference between now and a year ago. And I'm only getting a little bit of that deficit because of my privilege.
Thank you for that, Carol. I had alluded to a learning objective that I wanted to hit on earlier, and it's been talked about. I think we've talked around it, and it's been mentioned, but I just kind of want to hit it home here, I guess, which is the concept of recovery capital. Why I find it at least so useful is it is in a way a trauma-informed way of looking at things, meaning that rather than looking at somebody who has a problem with substance use or any other recovery issue and asking what's wrong with you, we are starting to ask ourselves the question, what happened to you? Or what resources do we have in our life? What supports do we have around us? When we're starting to look at the environment around that person as the things that we can actually have an impact on, that we can address. And I mentioned earlier, but the data around long-term recovery outcomes, first of all, there's not enough research about this, but the research that there is pretty unequivocal in that those who have, again, these pieces of recovery capital, it is correlated with positive long-term recovery outcomes, more so than the reason for initiating treatment in the first place. I certainly had the idea before that, well, if it's someone else who's forcing you to do it, like a judge or your family or whatever, then you're probably not going to do it because you're not doing it for yourself, right? And that makes sense in a way, because we're getting at motivation for recovery. But what the research shows us is that the thing that got us to recovery in the first place doesn't matter nearly as much as all of these other things that we're looking at, this recovery capital. This is why we feel it's so important that we're looking at this as a recovery community, so that we can ask ourselves, what can we provide within Recovery Cafe as a program, or within our community here to support recovery? So we've got about 20 minutes left in our training, and I want to make sure that we get to the second topic. So I'll push it back to you, Bruce.
Okay, well, thanks to those of you who shared. I'm really deeply moved by the things I'm hearing. And if you're not sharing, even, we're all having thoughts, and I'm finding this a very powerful experience. Just want to say that. I want to move to talking just a little bit about recovery maintenance. And I got number of things here. First, I just want to spend just a couple of minutes on this. These are some bullet points taken about relapse prevention being one aspect of recovery maintenance. And I'm going to frame this a little better as we move on, but I just want to mention this. This comes from a paper from about 20 years ago now, but there's been, I guess just in general, in terms of recovery maintenance, there really is very little research that's been done, and almost all of what's been done is very early stage things. Initiation, relapse prevention is something that they've done quite a bit of. And this paper I found interesting. It's really written for clinicians, but I think it still applies to us as volunteers. There is some really interesting things in there. It, like you say, some of the language is maybe a little technical, but I found reading it very, very interesting, because there are some areas, and I think many of us that come into recovery or stay in long-term recovery, we pick up, like the fourth item talks about eliminating myths regarding the effects of alcohol and other drugs, but also we get some myths about recovery as well. The relapse prevention, some of these ideas are grounded in cognitive behavioral therapy models, and just finding ways to, especially in high-risk situations, how can I change my thinking? How can I recognize that I'm in this situation, and how can I have the skills to cope? And I also thought some of the things about what he just, Mary Larimer is the writer of the paper. It's based on also on work done by Alan Marlette, who is, I guess, really like a giant in the relapse prevention field. But they distinguish between lapses and relapses. A lapse might be, okay, I've been sober for a little while, and last night I had 3 drinks. And today I'm in guilt and whatever, shame or whatever. Distinguishing a lapse is like maybe a bump in the road, to a relapse is basically full on back into addiction. And how one thing I found really interesting is how to change the lapse from being something wrong, as to instead recognizing that, hey, I found myself in this high risk situation and my skills for coping with it were lacking. Now, maybe there's something I can do to improve that. This, like I say, this is written for clinicians. I think working at the level of this in this paper is for, therapists or clinicians who, are experienced. But I think for us as volunteers, understanding how this can play out can be very helpful for us and for the people we're working with. And I know one of the things that I love about the Recovery Cafe and my time here in Seattle is that if I'm talking with somebody and I recognize they've got something going on that maybe could use some more help, there is great support for handing this or helping that person, directing them to people at the Recovery Cafe who can direct them to people in the community who can help them. So that's what I want to say about recovery or relapse prevention. Now, in terms of recovery maintenance, I want to just briefly talk about stages. Now, this is not based on research. This is anecdotal. This is based on my experience and where I think things happen. This is also not linear necessarily, but it is, I think, both with myself and with people that I've sponsored in 12-step programs over the years, I see these themes happening. The first one being, initiation, starting out. And I find slogans like one day at a time to be very helpful. That was, in fact, as a 20-year-old, the idea of not drinking forever, impossible. But one day at a time, I think I can do that. I also found this idea of take what you like and leave the rest to be very helpful, because I am a person sometimes who will find things that I don't like and I'll grab onto them, like a dog getting a steak and going, and rather, it's okay. Well, maybe that's going on, and maybe that need to do that is saying something about myself, but I found plenty of things that I do like and that do resonate. And so that is what I learned to quickly, fortunately, to latch onto and do it. And then also things about relapse prevention, avoiding the first drink or drug use. And I see initiation, it can vary, for, some people it's, pretty short, they make a decision and in a few weeks or something, they're kind of acting on it. Other people, some of this takes more time. But at some point, I think we get to a point where we sort of realize, and I know I did, I'm like in a new universe. I've come out of this, this experience I've had with my family and people around me. And suddenly I realized there's all this other stuff I had no clue about. So I started exploring this new universe and stabilizing. And also the the brain and body, and we need to physically heal and emotionally heal. And this can be, some of the physical things can take a couple years, and the exploring it can be, take some time. But it's kind of, after we kind of had the pink cloud. I know I had one, this is great, and it's gonna, and then I kind of crashed on that, but then started coming out of that crash, and that's when I started getting into this phase. This third phase, about rooting out these deep patterns, took me, it was some years. And somewhere in there is when I started attending Al-Anon, which was for me a milestone in understanding what happened to me, and how I was probably, I probably qualified for Al-Anon way before I qualified for AA or NA. And so this process for me is, I think of it as spiraling towards self-awareness, that it's this continual, for instance, my mother passed away, and the grief that I carried. I mean, I thought when I landed in rehab, they said I should go to a grief group. And I thought, well, no, that was a year ago. I'm over that. Well, I had no idea. And that is a theme that has come up in my life, working through that at deeper and deeper levels. It's not a linear thing. It's a spiral, and it comes and goes. And then finally, I think there's a way of, living life on life's terms. It's maybe a little bit of a cliche, but understanding that I'm on this human journey. And there are lots of ways to find awareness. There are spiritual paths. There are all kinds of things, but this is the path that chose me, I guess. And I find that, yes, I still, struggle with things, and I've this time of COVID has been a struggle. The past week or 10 days with the smoke has driven me crazy. I am about to retire from a job that I used to like, but I don't like anymore. That's been hard. But, I do know today I've got some tools. If I choose to use them, I've got some tools. In the interest of time, that's all I want to say here. The last thing I want to talk about is a little bit about initiation approaches. And I think some of this comes from, initially from the 12-step model, but to other things. And I've qualified, you see at the end I have stick or carrot. And, the first one, I was starting with A, you got to hit bottom to be a place of recovery. You got to go down there. If you haven't had enough, go out and drink some more. But it's still, it's a, it's a fear-based stick kind of thing. And then maybe around somewhere, around 1950 or so, started raising, well, maybe we can raise the bottom. You don't have to go all the way down. For me, as as a young person coming in, some of the deep bottom stuff I didn't relate to, but also when I found, because I drank and used drugs through some very formative years, I went down very fast. But still, it's kind of like, okay, have you suffered enough? Da 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 da. In the 70s, we had the intervention model where, we maybe have involved family to say, well, your drinking and drug use is affecting me this way, da 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 da, and we want you to go into treatment and whatever. And still a stick model. And around, I guess, in the late 90s to 2000, concept called motivational interviewing. has arisen as a way to, well, I think of it as we don't have time to get into it. And I think, Brian, we're probably going to have a separate training on this, but it is very much a carrot approach for finding hope and recognizing that there is hope in your life, especially for people who are hopeless. And, I have met people who there is no bottom far enough. It just, there is no, but this is a concept that can be helpful, not just for them, but for all of us. Again, it's one that's typically best served by a therapist or a professional who's familiar with the techniques. I think me as a layperson and as a family member of people with addiction, it's, especially as a family, it's very difficult. But there are some really useful concepts I've found. And again, I think one of them comes from the philosophy of the Recovery Cafe. So that's enough from me. And we've still got a few minutes left. I would just like to open the floor for the rest of our time for people to share, again, anything that you heard that resonates, either of what I just talked about or other things that have bubbled up for you through the course of the last hour and a half we've been together. And I feel like the time has gone by like that. It always does, but I do want to have a little time to do that. And maybe if we need a little more than 11:30, Brian, I'll leave that up to you. So feel free, anybody who feels moved to speak.
One thing I do want to say about the concept of recovery maintenance, or I've also seen it called recovery management, is that we're shifting the way that we're thinking about recovery from relapse prevention, and there's a lot of great research and efficacy behind that. And even the term itself focuses on a negative thing, relapse prevention. We are preventing the thing that we don't want to have happen. I don't want to relapse. I want to avoid that thing. How do I avoid the bad thing there, right? Whereas recovery maintenance or recovery management is, how do we keep this going? How do I sustain this thing that I do want, this change or many changes that I've made in my life? So we'll probably, in the end, if we brought a clinician in here, they'd say, we're talking about the same thing, guys. And for me, it's just shifting the way that we talk about it changes the way that we think about it as well, from how do I keep this thing going?
Yeah, good point, Brian. Right. Try not thinking of a dancing pink elephant.
Yeah.
As an example.
Well, I do want to, thank everybody for their time here today. So, one way that I like to end groups sometimes is to go around, similar to when we did introductions. We have just a tiny bit of time, but if when it comes to you'd like to offer even just a phrase or one word, even reflection that you have and you want to offer to the group, that would be lovely. So I'll start, and I'll just say, feeling very grateful for our time together. And if we can do an order like we did last time, I'll ask Carol, Rhea, Janice. If you don't want to do it, just say pass.
Thank you for letting me learn with you.
I'm going to say the same. I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Yes, I'm very, very grateful for all of this. It's so helpful. And I'm just getting more and more that the connection is so important. That's what I missed out in my lifetime, and I'm seeing it so clearly now. So it's great. It just reinforces it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll do Mark, Shirley, Donna.
I have 1,000,001 questions, so Brian, I'll wait for your call to kind of dig into those. And it all revolves, as you say, around Maslow's hierarchy, I think. It's a little easier when you're privileged than it is when you're down and out and society doesn't like you and you don't smell good and you can't find a bathroom and so on and so forth. So thank you for just allowing me to attend this session.
When I walked into my very first ACA meeting, I crossed the threshold. There was maybe 10 people in the room, and I just knew these are my people. I just knew. I didn't know a lot about ACA, but these are my people. And that's how I felt when I walked into the Recovery Cafe. The most valuable, well, two. One, that we have the real will and desire to start something new with our lives. And secondly is to find people that will hold you up and let you fall and help pick you up again. The whole program is just a miracle. Thanks so much for everybody.
I just wanted to say, well, I'm grateful that I ran into you that one day, Brian, and that you are doing this these amazing things with the Recovery Cafe and putting this together. So I just want to say that I'm grateful for that and for all of you to being here today. And it was nice to connect, even though it's over Zoom and it's all electronic, but it's what we got. So it still makes me feel more hopeful in general. And I just I'm grateful for our connection. Thank you.
Thank you. And then to finish us off, we'll have Denise, Caitlin, John, and Bruce, I'll give you a chance too.
Thanks, Brian. I'm just going to say community assets.
Yeah, truly.
Oh, is it?
Yep.
Oh, gosh, I really can't help but second everyone on just feeling really grateful and yeah, grateful to be connecting with you all right now. And that's an overwhelming feeling at the moment. So that's, yeah, thank you.
Well, I'm not recovering from alcoholism or drug addiction, but I have my own issues, and it brings back the thought process of we're all recovering from something, and there are similarities across the board on all of them. And so
And go ahead, Bruce, you get to finish us off.
Okay. Well, I just would like to thank you all for being here and for participating in the way that you have. Because I really, like I said earlier, I'm deeply moved by the experiences that each of you have shared and the perspective and wisdom that you each have brought to this little virtual space we've had together. So I'll look forward to seeing you more in the future. I am going to be moving to Whidbey Island soon, and so I will be closer to Port Townsend, and I will be a presence in the cafe there physically once things get back to the new normal. So I look forward to seeing you all face to face.
And thank you, Bruce, for helping facilitate for today. I want to respect everyone's time. Thank you for coming, and I hope to see you all soon.